Good morning, Barry Bryson here. Thank you for joining me for another 5 good minutes with the Word. We're in the Gospel of Mark, and we're in chapter 4. And we were looking at verses 1 through 20 yesterday. And we just began to think about the parable of the sower itself. And so I won't read the parable over again as I read it yesterday, but I will just share it. Jesus says the sower went out to sow, and as he broadcast the seed, some of it fell on the road, and the birds immediately ate it. Some of it fell on rocky ground. The soil was thin. It sprung up quickly, but because there was no depth to the root system, when the sun came, it scorched. It scorched the plants, and they died. Some fell among weeds and thorns. They did grow, but they were choked by the weeds around them, and their growth was severely retarded. They made no progress and were not productive in any way. They didn't die. That's an important point. And then some fell on good soil, and the seed that fell on good soil experienced exponential growth that is miraculous, 30, 60, 100-fold. If you can imagine a stalk of corn in a cornfield having 30 ears of corn on it, or 60 or 100, that's what he's describing. And so there is a miraculous element. It's just a brilliant story, one that we can think about all of our lives and continue to ponder and be fed by, because there's just so many dimensions to it, and that's the point of a parable. Especially, a longer parable. It's a gift for your lifetime that continues to teach you as you ponder it. And that's kind of the point of the parable itself. Some people hear the word as he explains this parable later on to his disciples. People who hear the word, some folks, they're just hard to it. They are not going to receive it, and it doesn't take root at all. And Satan comes and snatches the seed up. Some people are excited initially, but they have not thought about it. They haven't pondered it. They haven't truly believed. They've just become excited about a slogan that has touched their heart in the moment. And because there's no root system, as soon as things get a little difficult, they're going to go away. We've experienced all these things in our own lives with others, and maybe even in ourselves. And then some fall among soil, and the soil, is sufficient for growth, but they're surrounded by weeds. And he equates the weeds with cares, and especially our stuff. And we don't die, but we shrivel, and we become anemic, and we become unproductive. And later on, he'll tell us about seed that becomes, plants that become unproductive. The Lord will not accept those. He'll gather them together and throw them in the fire. But if we allow for growth, if we take the time to let the seeds germinate, and we grow, that growth is going to be exponential. We already know that plants don't grow because we ask them to. We can only, within God's created order, provide ideal circumstances for seed to grow, even to this day. And we are largely dependent then still on God's processes, on sun and rain. And even then, we can't take a pebble and make it grow. It still is up to God to make grass grow, or to make corn grow, or to make an apple tree produce apples. God does that. We don't do that. We can affect it within the system that God has established, but we can't generate it. And we can't to this day, and we never will be able to generate it. But he's talking about something even beyond the natural processes that God has put in place. He's talking about exponential growth. There's so many lessons to take from this. There's a whole bit about soil analysis, and almost anybody who stands up to preach this preaches that part of it. What does the soil of your heart look like? And of course, that is the mega lesson. But there are so many other lessons. There's just the mathematics of it. The seed is being broadcast universally. And so this isn't about a Calvinistic notion of certain people being called and certain others from birth being rejected. The seed is broadcast, but it's also telling us that the facts of the matter are not everyone is going to accept the word. There are some people who, when the word it falls on them, they have already hardened their hearts to the point that they're not now and not ever going to receive it. And we have to accept the mathematics of that. In fact, most seed will fall on, the soil that will not produce growth at all or long range growth. Jesus says this in the Sermon on the Mount. And so there's that. And then there is a third lesson, and there are probably 300 lessons, but there's a third lesson that to me is completely obvious and evident, which is this. If the seed is going to take root, we have to cultivate it. We have to provide it good soil. And what does that mean? It means in our hearts and in our heads, we have to think about it and ponder it and understand it and live it. We have to give it time. It's a process that God does and that we yield to, but that yielding is active. It's active yielding. It's something that requires our thought, our resources, mental, emotional resources, and our effort. And that effort is put into the yielding of God's process. And that is as simple as anybody that's ever tried to grow petunias for their front porch or put a tomato plant in their backyard. We understand this concept, that it is God's process and that we yield to that process, but the yielding is an active yielding, not a passive yielding. Okay. Well, that's what we're going to say about that. So tomorrow we're going to pick up with verse 21. Thank you for joining me for another 5 good minutes with the Word.